In the frozen wastelands of the far north, where the wall towers over the edge of the known world, there lived an old man whose true identity had been forgotten by almost everyone in Westeros. Blind, frail, and ancient beyond measure, he served as the Maester at Castle Black, offering wisdom to the brothers of the Night's Watch who protected the realm from the terrors beyond the wall. Most knew him simply as Maester Aemon, an elderly scholar who had spent decades in service to the Watch. But beneath that humble exterior lay one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. This was no ordinary Maester. This was Aemon Targaryen, a prince who had been offered the Iron Throne itself and who had turned it down not once, but repeatedly throughout his long life. This is a story of the Targaryen prince who chose honor over power, duty over desire, and service over sovereignty. To understand the magnitude of Aemon's choices, we need to journey back to his beginnings. Aemon Targaryen was born in the year 198 after Aegon's conquest, the third son of King Maekar I Targaryen and Lady Diana Dane. Unlike many of his Targaryen ancestors, Aemon was not born of the traditional brother-sister marriages that had long characterized the Dragon dynasty. His grandfather, King Daeron II, had broken that tradition by marrying outside the immediate family, bringing fresh blood into the royal line. This perhaps foreshadowed the unconventional path that young Aemon would eventually take. From his earliest days, Aemon was named after a legend. His namesake was Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, his great-great-uncle, who was remembered as perhaps the noblest knight who ever lived. The Dragon Knight had served in the Kingsguard with unwavering loyalty and had died defending his king. It was a name that carried the weight of honor, duty, and sacrifice, virtues that would come to define the younger Aemon's life in ways no one could have predicted when he was just a baby in the royal nursery. Growing up in the Red Keep, young Aemon would have been surrounded by all the trappings of royalty and power. The Iron Throne sat in the Great Hall, forged from 1,000 swords surrendered by Aegon the Conqueror's enemies. Dragons may have been gone from the world by then, but the Targaryens still commanded respect and fear throughout the Seven Kingdoms. As a prince, Aemon had access to the finest tutors, the best swordsmen to train him, and all the luxuries that came with being born into one of the most powerful families in the known world. But Aemon was the third son, and in the brutal arithmetic of royal succession, that meant his path to power was far from certain. The Targaryen family tree at the time was crowded with potential heirs. King Daeron II had 4 grown sons, and 3 of those sons had children of their own. There were princes everywhere you looked, and the specter of too many claimants to the throne was something that worried the king and his advisors. It was a lesson learned from history, from the Blackfyre rebellions, where rival claimants had torn the realm apart with civil war. So when Aemon was just 9 or 10 years old, a decision was made that would alter the course of his entire life. He would be sent to the Citadel in Old Town to train as a Maester. Now, this might seem like a strange fate for a prince, but there was a certain logic to it. Maesters served the realm with knowledge and wisdom, and they took vows that included giving up all claims to inheritance, titles, and even their family names. By sending Aemon to the Citadel, the crown was removing one potential rival from the succession, reducing the chances of future conflict. It was a practical solution to a political problem, but it was also asking a great deal from a young boy who had been born into royalty. Despite whatever reservations his father, Prince Maekar, may have had, young Aemon went to Old Town and threw himself into his studies. The path to becoming a Maester was long and demanding. Students had to master a vast range of subjects, from medicine to mathematics, from history to astronomy, from the art of healing to the science of ravens. For each area of knowledge they mastered, they would forge a link in their chain, literally creating the symbol of their learning. Some students spent years, even decades, trying to complete their chains. But Aemon was quick and intelligent, possessed of the kind of sharp mind that could grasp complex concepts and retain vast amounts of information. He completed his chain and earned the title of Maester at just 19 years old, a remarkable achievement that spoke to his dedication and natural abilities. During his time in Old Town, Aemon had a visitor who would play a significant role in the history of Westeros, his younger brother Aegon. At that point, Aegon was serving as squire to a hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall, traveling the realm and having adventures far removed from the intrigues of court. The brothers met, and Aemon measured Duncan's impressive height and even gave Aegon a mule as a gift. It was a brief encounter, but it showed that Aemon maintained connections to his family even as he pursued his new life as a Maester. Little did either brother know then how their paths would intertwine again in the most dramatic circumstances. After earning his chain, Maester Aemon served at the court of an unnamed lordling, putting his knowledge to practical use. It was honest work, the kind that Maesters throughout the realm performed daily, tending to the sick, advising their lords, and maintaining the flow of information through the Raven network. Aemon might have lived out his entire life in such service, respected but obscure, his royal blood gradually forgotten. But then something happened that would thrust him back into the center of Targaryen politics. In 221, after Aegon's conquest, through a series of unlikely events, Aemon's father, Maekar, became king. The new king summoned his sons to court, and Aemon found himself back in King's Landing, back in the world of power and politics he had left behind as a child. King Maekar wanted his learned son nearby, perhaps on the small council where his wisdom could help guide the realm. But Aemon made a crucial decision. He didn't want to displace the Grand Maester or interfere with the established order of the Maesters. Instead, he chose to serve at Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, which was held by his eldest brother, Prince Daeron. It was a compromise that allowed him to serve his family while maintaining his Maester's vows and avoiding the cutthroat politics of King's Landing. Then tragedy struck, as it so often does in the world of Westeros. Prince Daeron, the heir to the throne and Aemon's elder brother, died of the pox. It was a reminder that even princes and heirs are not immune to disease and death. But Daeron's death meant something else too. It moved Aemon closer to the throne. His other elder brother, Aerion, was called Aerion Brightflame, and he was known for his cruelty and madness. When Aerion eventually died in 232 after Aegon's conquest, allegedly from drinking wildfire in the belief it would transform him into a dragon, the succession became even more complicated. The following year, 233 after Aegon's conquest, King Maekar himself died in the Peak Uprising, a rebellion that took the life of the king. With Maekar dead and two of his elder sons gone, the question of succession became urgent and contentious. A great council was called, one of those rare assemblies where the high lords of Westeros would gather to decide who should sit the Iron Throne. And here we come to the most defining moment of Aemon's life, the first of what he would later call the three great tests of his vows. Aemon was a Maester with a chain around his neck, having sworn oaths to serve the realm through knowledge and healing, oaths that included forsaking all claims to lands, titles, and inheritance. But he was also still Prince Aemon Targaryen by birth, the son of a king and the grandson of a king. Some of the assembled lords looked at the remaining candidates and saw problems. Prince Aegon, Aemon's younger brother, had spent years as a squire to a hedge knight, living among the small folk. Some considered him half a peasant, unsuitable for the throne. There was Aerion's infant son, but placing a baby on the Iron Throne with all the regency conflicts that would entail seemed like a recipe for disaster. So eyes turned to Aemon. Here was a man in the fullness of his manhood, learned, wise, and carrying the blood of kings. Some lords quietly suggested that Aemon could be released from his Maester's vows. After all, such things had been done before in exceptional circumstances. The crown could be his. The Iron Throne, with all its power and prestige, could be his to claim. He could rule the seven kingdoms, command armies, make laws, and shape the destiny of millions. All he had to do was say yes. Aemon said no. He refused quietly but firmly. He had taken vows, sacred oaths that meant something to him. He had given up his claim to the throne when he put on his maester's chain, and he would not break those vows for anything, not even for the chance to be king. The crown passed to his younger brother, who became Aegon IV, later known as Aegon the Unlikely because of the improbable chain of events that had brought a fourth son to the throne. But Aemon's refusal at the Great Council wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. Aemon knew human nature. He understood politics and ambition. He knew that as long as he remained anywhere near the center of power, there would be those who looked at him and saw an alternative to King Aegon. Ambitious lords, disappointed claimants. Anyone with a grievance against the new king might try to use Aemon as a figurehead for a rebellion. They could claim they were simply supporting the rightful king, the elder brother who should have taken the throne. Aemon didn't want that. He didn't want to be a tool for ambitious men to tear the realm apart. He didn't want to be the cause of a civil war, even inadvertently. So Aemon made another extraordinary choice. He would go to the Wall. He would join the Night's Watch, that ancient order of warriors and outcasts who guarded the realm from the terrors beyond the northern frontier. The Night's Watch had its own sacred vows, even more binding than those of the Maesters. When you joined the Watch, you gave up everything. You would hold no lands, father no children, wear no crowns. You would serve for life, and your life belonged to the Watch. By taking these vows on top of his Maester's vows, Aemon would put himself forever beyond the reach of those who might try to use him for their political schemes. King Aegon understood and supported his brother's decision. He even provided Aemon with an honor guard for the journey north, though, in a darkly practical touch, this honor guard consisted largely of criminals from the dungeons who were being sent to take the Black themselves. Among these men was Brynden Rivers, also called Blood Raven, a fascinating figure in his own right who would later become Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Together, this unlikely band made the long journey to the Wall, to the edge of civilization, to a life of service and sacrifice. At Castle Black, Aemon began a new existence that would last for decades. He became the Maester of the Watch, tending to the men who came to the Wall from all walks of life. Some were criminals fleeing justice, some were bastards seeking purpose, some were younger sons with no inheritance, and some were true believers in the Watch's mission to defend the realm. Aemon served them all without distinction, treating their wounds, reading their letters, and offering counsel when it was sought. He was so dedicated to his role, so completely absorbed in his duties, that as the years passed, most of the Seven Kingdoms simply forgot about his royal heritage. But Aemon never forgot who he was or what he had given up. The second test of his vows came during Robert's rebellion, when the Targaryen dynasty that Aemon had been born into was torn down in blood and fire. Aemon was 85 years old by then, blind and frail, when the ravens brought news from the south. His nephew, King Aerys II, the Mad King, had been overthrown. Aerys had been killed by a member of his own king's guard, but the horror didn't end there. Prince Rhaegar, Aemon's great-nephew with whom he had corresponded over the years, was dead, killed on the Trident by Robert Baratheon's warhammer. Princess Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, had been murdered. And then came the worst news of all. The little children, Rhaegar's son and daughter, had been killed too, their small bodies presented to the new king as grotesque trophies. Imagine what that must have been like for Aemon. He was trapped at the Wall, unable to see, unable to act, unable to do anything but listen as his family was systematically destroyed. Everything he had been born into, the great house Targaryen that had ruled for nearly 3 centuries, was being extinguished. The few survivors, a young woman named Daenerys and her brother Viserys, fled into exile across the narrow sea. And Aemon, bound by his vows to the Night's Watch, could do nothing. He couldn't march south to avenge his family. He couldn't offer them shelter or support. His duty was to the Watch, and the Watch took no part in the wars of the Seven Kingdoms. So he sat at the Wall and grieved, carrying a burden of sorrow that would never entirely leave him. Years later, Aemon would speak about these trials to a young man named Jon Snow, who was struggling with his own conflict between love and duty. Aemon told Jon about the true meaning of vows, about how easy it is to maintain honor when there's no cost to it, but how difficult it becomes when you must choose between duty and everything you hold dear. He spoke of his own tests, of being offered a crown, of hearing about the death of his family, of the constant struggle between what he wanted to do and what his vows demanded he do. And in sharing his own story, Aemon gave Jon and countless others a glimpse into the soul of a man who had chosen honor at every turn, no matter how much it cost him. What makes Aemon's story so compelling is not just a single dramatic moment of refusing the crown. though that would be remarkable enough on its own. It's a sustained commitment, the repeated choosing of duty over desire across a span of decades. Think about it. Aemon lived to be over 100 years old. For roughly 70 of those years, he served at the wall, far from comfort and power, in a harsh environment where winters could last for years and the Night's Watch was increasingly understaffed and under-resourced. He could have changed his mind at any point. He could have written to his brother, King Aegon, and said he wanted to come back south. He could have used his royal blood to gain favor or position, but he never did. Instead, Aemon became a moral anchor for the Night's Watch. Lord Commanders came and went during his service, but Aemon remained, offering wisdom and perspective that came from his unique life experience. He had seen the best and worst of what power could do. He had watched his family rise to incredible heights and fall to terrible depths. He understood both the necessity of duty and the pull of personal desire, and he used that understanding to guide others, never with judgment, but always with compassion and clarity. There's something particularly poignant about Aemon's relationship with Jon Snow. Though he never knew the full truth of Jon's parentage, Jon was actually Aegon Targaryen, the son of Prince Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark, making him Aemon's great-great-grandnephew. But Jon had been raised as Ned Stark's bastard, and that secret was kept from everyone, including Aemon. Yet Aemon saw something in Jon, recognized the struggle of a young man torn between different loyalties, and offered him the kind of wisdom that only comes from lived experience. When Aemon told Jon that love is the death of duty, he wasn't speaking as a Maester reciting some abstract principle. He was speaking as a man who had loved his family, who had felt the pull of that love, and who had still chosen duty because he believed it was the right thing to do. In his final days, Aemon's thoughts turned to another Targaryen far across the sea. News had reached the wall of Daenerys Targaryen, the last daughter of the Mad King, who had hatched 3 dragons and was building an army in Slaver's Bay. Aemon, ancient and failing, cursed his old age because it meant he couldn't go to her, couldn't offer her the guidance and counsel that she desperately needed as she tried to forge a new path for herself and her people. He had spent his entire life in service, and even at the very end, his thoughts were not about what he had sacrificed, but about how he might still serve, how he might still help the last remnant of his family. It's a testament to his character that after everything he had been through, after all the losses and sorrows, his instinct was still to give rather than to take. When Aemon finally died, it was on a ship bound for Old Town, far from the wall he had served for so long. He was 102 years old, having lived through more history than most Maesters would ever record. Samwell Tarly, who had become Aemon's steward and friend, spoke at his funeral, and it's in Sam's words that we perhaps get the truest measure of what Aemon had achieved. Sam talked about how Aemon could have been a king, but he chose to let his brother take the crown. He spoke about Aemon's wisdom, his gentleness, his kindness. He called Aemon's life heroic, not because of great battles won or enemies vanquished, but because of the quiet, sustained heroism of choosing duty and honor every single day for a lifetime. So what are we to make of this extraordinary life? What does Aemon's story tell us about power, duty, and the choices we make? In a world where most people grasp for power, where the Iron Throne was considered the ultimate prize worth any amount of bloodshed and betrayal, Aemon Targaryen stood apart. He shows us that there is nobility in service, that there is power in keeping your word, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no to what the world offers you. Aemon's choice wasn't made out of weakness or fear. It wasn't because he didn't think he could rule or because he lacked ambition. He refused the throne because he had given his word, because he had taken vows that meant something to him, and because he believed that maintaining those vows was more important than personal power. In doing so, he avoided what could have been a devastating civil war. He gave his brother Aegon the chance to be a good king, which by most accounts Aegon was, earning the love of the common people and trying to improve their lives. And he found his own kind of power and influence at the Wall, where his wisdom shaped the decisions of Lord Commanders and affected the lives of countless brothers of the Night's Watch. There's also something to be said about how Aemon's story challenges our assumptions about what makes a life significant or successful. By conventional measures, Aemon gave up everything. He gave up wealth, power, the chance to have a family, the comfort of living in a great castle, the respect that comes with being a king. He spent the last 7 decades of his life in a harsh, cold, isolated place, serving an order that the rest of Westeros largely ignored or looked down upon. He went blind in his old age and ended his days far from anything he had known in his youth. If you were to ask most people whether they would trade a throne for such a life, the answer would be an emphatic no. But look at what Aemon gained. He gained integrity, the knowledge that he had kept faith with his vows and principles. He gained wisdom, the kind that comes from seeing multiple generations pass and understanding the long arc of history. He gained the respect and love of the men he served with, who valued him not for his birth, but for his character. And perhaps most importantly, he gained peace. By removing himself from the Game of Thrones, Aemon avoided the paranoia, the betrayals, the constant scheming that poisoned so many lives in the Seven Kingdoms. He didn't have to wonder if his friends were plotting against him or if his wine might be poisoned. He knew who he was and what he stood for, and that gave him a kind of freedom that no crown could provide. It's worth considering, too, what Aemon's choice meant for the broader Targaryen story. The Targaryens fell, in large part, because of the destructive patterns they couldn't break, the incest that led to madness, the belief that they were above the laws that governed other men, the willingness to burn cities and kingdoms to maintain their power. Aemon represented a different path, one where a Targaryen could choose service over sovereignty, duty over dynasty. In a way, he was the best of what the Targaryens could be, carrying their blood but not their arrogance, their intelligence but not their cruelty, their sense of destiny but channeling it toward protecting the realm rather than ruling it. The tragedy is that Aemon's example wasn't followed by most of his relatives. If more Targaryens had possessed his wisdom, his humility, his willingness to serve rather than command, perhaps the dynasty would not have fallen. Perhaps there would have been no Mad King, no Robert's Rebellion, no near extinction of the Dragon Dynasty. But that's the nature of wisdom. It's easy to see in retrospect, but difficult to apply in the moment when power is there for the taking and vows seem like mere words compared to the weight of a crown. What's particularly striking about Aemon is that he never expressed regret for his choices. He spoke about the difficulty of his vows, about the pain of the test he endured, but never about wishing he had chosen differently. When he told Jon Snow about love being the death of duty, he wasn't advocating for one over the other. He was simply acknowledging the reality of the choice, that sometimes you have to choose between two things you value, and whatever you choose will cost you something. Aemon chose duty, knowing full well what it would cost him, and he lived with that choice for over a century without looking back. That's not weakness or resignation, that's strength of a rare and precious kind. In the end, Maester Aemon's story is about the choices that define us, not the big, dramatic moments alone, though those are part of it, but the daily decision to keep your word when it would be easier to break it, to serve when you could rule, to give up power when you could grasp it. Aemon Targaryen was offered a throne and chose a chain. He was born in a castle and chose a wall. He could have been remembered as a king, perhaps a great one, but instead he's remembered as a maester and a man of the Night's Watch. And somehow, in making those choices, in walking away from power again and again, he became something greater than a king. He became a living example of what honor really means, not the showy, performative honor that's really about glory and reputation, but the quiet, steadfast honor that's about keeping faith with your principles even when no one is watching and it costs you everything. As we look back on the history of Westeros, filled with its wars and betrayals, its mad kings and power-hungry lords, Aemon Targaryen stands out as a singular figure. The prince who could have been king but chose to be something better, a servant, a healer, a counselor, a keeper of ancient vows in an age when such things were increasingly rare. His life reminds us that the truest power doesn't come from sitting on a throne or commanding armies. It comes from knowing who you are, what you stand for, and having the courage to live according to those principles no matter what the world offers or threatens. In a series filled with characters grasping for power, Aemon remains the one who let it go and, in doing so, revealed what real strength looks like.